When Allied forces hit the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, they faced what many consider the deadliest weapon of World War II. It wasn't a tank or artillery piece, but a machine gun that could fire 1,200 rounds per minute with such devastating accuracy that soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The MG42 and its crews became priority targets that had to be eliminated at any cost. But hunting these gunners wasn't just dangerous. It was practically a suicide mission. Out of every 10 soldiers who volunteered for these specialized hunting missions, only 3 would make it back alive. The MG42 positions were deliberately placed to create overlapping fields of fire that turned entire sections of beach into kill zones. Yet somehow, Allied forces found ways to systematically hunt down these deadly nests one by one. Their methods were as brutal as they were effective, and the psychological toll on both hunters and hunted was unlike anything seen before in warfare. To understand why these machine gun crews became such high-value targets, you need to know exactly what the Allies were up against. The MG42 wasn't just another machine gun. German engineers had designed it specifically to maximize casualties while minimizing the crew needed to operate it. With a cyclic rate nearly double that of any Allied equivalent, a single MG42 could effectively control an area that would normally require an entire squad of riflemen. The gun itself weighed only 25 pounds, making it surprisingly mobile for such a devastating weapon. But what made it truly terrifying was its reliability. While other machine guns would overheat or jam after sustained firing, the MG42 featured a quick-change barrel system that allowed crews to maintain continuous fire for extended periods. German gunners could swap out a hot barrel for a cool one in under 10 seconds, meaning there was virtually no break in their devastating fire. German defensive doctrine called for these weapons to be positioned in carefully prepared bunkers and pillboxes scattered across the Atlantic Wall. Each position was engineered to survive direct hits from naval artillery and positioned to support neighboring gun positions. The result was a network of interlocking fire that could theoretically stop any invasion attempt cold. When the first wave of Allied troops hit Omaha Beach, they discovered just how effective this system really was. Machine gun fire from concealed positions raked the landing craft before they even reached the shore. Men who made it onto the beach found themselves pinned down in the open, unable to advance or retreat. The distinctive sound of the MG42 became synonymous with death, and entire companies were decimated in minutes. But the Germans had made one critical miscalculation. They assumed that devastating firepower alone would be enough to repel the invasion. What they didn't account for was the determination of specialized Allied units, trained specifically to hunt down and eliminate machine gun positions. These weren't regular infantry, but carefully selected soldiers who understood that their mission was essentially a one-way trip. The British developed specialized assault teams called AVRE units, equipped with modified Churchill tanks mounting massive petard mortars. These 290mm weapons could demolish even the strongest bunkers, but getting close enough to use them meant crossing open ground under direct fire. American forces took a different approach, relying on small teams of volunteers armed with Bangalore torpedoes, satchel charges, and flamethrowers. Both approaches required soldiers to do something that went against every survival instinct: deliberately expose themselves to draw fire from concealed positions. Only by forcing the MG42 crews to reveal their locations could the hunting teams identify their targets. This meant that someone had to be willing to become human bait, knowing full well that the first burst of machine gun fire would likely be their last. The psychological pressure on these hunting teams was immense. They knew the statistics. They understood that most of them wouldn't survive the day. Yet they also knew that without their sacrifice, the entire invasion could fail. Thousands of other soldiers were counting on them to clear those deadly positions, and failure meant watching their comrades die in the surf. For the German machine gun crews, the situation was equally terrifying, but for different reasons. They had been told that their positions were impregnable, that Allied forces would break themselves against the Atlantic Wall like waves against rocks. Instead, they found themselves facing enemies who seemed willing to die just to get close enough to kill them. The hunting of MG42 positions became a deadly game of cat and mouse played out across the bloodiest beaches in military history. Every position eliminated saved dozens of Allied lives, but the cost in terms of the hunters themselves was staggering. These specialized teams developed tactics that were as ingenious as they were desperate, finding ways to turn the Germans' own defensive advantages against them. What happened next would determine not just the fate of D-Day, but the entire course of the war in Europe. The methods these hunting teams developed were so effective that they fundamentally changed how modern armies approach fortified positions. But the human cost of these tactics was something that would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. The first major breakthrough came when Allied engineers realized they could use the Germans' own defensive strategy against them. MG42 positions were built to withstand frontal assault, but their designers had focused so heavily on forward-facing threats that they left critical vulnerabilities elsewhere. Smart hunting teams began studying the construction patterns of these bunkers, looking for weak points that could be exploited. One of the most effective techniques involved what soldiers called the mirror approach. Teams would split into multiple groups, with one creating a deliberate distraction from the expected angle of attack, while others approached from completely unexpected directions. This wasn't just about flanking maneuvers that any infantry unit might attempt. These were carefully choreographed operations where every movement had to be precisely timed to avoid the overlapping fields of fire. The distraction teams had perhaps the most dangerous job of all. They would deliberately expose themselves at maximum range, moving just enough to draw the attention of German gunners without getting close enough to be effectively engaged. Meanwhile, the actual assault teams would use this window to advance from blind spots, often crawling hundreds of yards through sand, mud, and debris, while their comrades drew fire. Communication between these split teams was almost impossible under combat conditions. Radio equipment was too bulky and unreliable, and hand signals were useless when teams were separated by hundreds of yards of open ground. Everything had to be planned in advance and executed with split-second timing. If the distraction team moved too early or too late, the assault team would be caught in the open with nowhere to hide. Some of the most successful hunting operations used what became known as the leapfrog method. Instead of trying to approach a single position directly, teams would systematically eliminate adjacent positions first, creating safe corridors for more direct assaults. This required incredible coordination between multiple hunting teams operating simultaneously across different sections of the beach. The weapon of choice for these close-range assaults was often the satchel charge, a canvas bag packed with explosives that could be thrown or placed directly against bunker walls. But getting close enough to use these charges meant surviving not just machine gun fire, but also the defensive measures German engineers had built around each position. Many bunkers were surrounded by minefields, wire obstacles, and pre-sighted mortar positions that could be called in at a moment's notice. German machine gun crews quickly adapted to these hunting tactics. They began using dummy positions and false muzzle flashes to confuse Allied assault teams. Some crews would fire short bursts from multiple positions, making it appear as though they had more guns than they actually did. Others would hold their fire completely until Allied soldiers were almost on top of them, then open up at point-blank range. The most experienced German gunners developed a tactic they called the death trap. They would allow small groups of Allied soldiers to advance close to their positions, even letting them believe they had successfully flanked the bunker. Then, when these soldiers were too close to retreat and too far from support, the machine gun would open fire along with pre-positioned riflemen who had been waiting in concealment. Weather conditions on D-Day made everything worse for the hunting teams. Rain and wind affected visibility, making it difficult to spot muzzle flashes or coordinate movements. The rough seas had scattered landing craft across wider areas than planned, meaning that supporting elements were often miles away when hunting teams needed them most. Some teams found themselves completely isolated, cut off from reinforcement or resupply. The psychological warfare between hunters and hunted became as important as the actual fighting. German crews would sometimes fire tracer rounds in patterns designed to create maximum fear, while Allied teams used sound effects and diversions to make their numbers seem larger than they actually were. Both sides understood that breaking the enemy's will to fight was often more effective than simply overwhelming them with firepower. Medical support for hunting teams was practically non-existent during the initial assault phases. Wounded soldiers had to either crawl back to aid stations on their own or be left behind until the position was secured. Many teams made pacts that wounded members would be given quick morphine injections and weapons to defend themselves if evacuation wasn't possible. The alternative was being captured alive by crews who had just watched their comrades die in brutal close-quarters fighting. By midday on June 6th, the most successful hunting teams had developed an almost supernatural ability to read the battlefield. They could identify active MG42 positions by the smallest details, sound patterns that indicated low ammunition, or subtle changes in firing angles that suggested crew fatigue or casualties. This knowledge came at a terrible price, learned through trial and error that cost hundreds of lives. The tide of battle was beginning to shift, but the deadliest phase of the hunt was yet to come. By the end of D-Day, the specialized hunting teams had accomplished something that military strategists had deemed nearly impossible. They had systematically dismantled the most formidable defensive network ever constructed, breaking the back of Hitler's Atlantic Wall through sheer determination and tactical innovation. The cost was staggering. Of the thousands of soldiers who volunteered for these missions, barely 30% survived to see the sunset on June 6th. The techniques developed on those blood-soaked beaches would revolutionize military doctrine for decades to come. Modern special forces still study the coordination methods, the psychological tactics, and the split-second timing that these hunting teams perfected under the most extreme conditions imaginable. What started as desperate improvisation became the foundation for how armies approach fortified positions even today. But perhaps the most important legacy of these hunters isn't found in military manuals or tactical guides. It's in the simple fact that their sacrifice opened the door for the liberation of an entire continent. Every MG42 position they eliminated saved countless lives in the waves that followed. Every bunker they cleared brought freedom one step closer to millions of people living under occupation. The men who hunted the hunters of D-Day proved that no defensive position, no matter how perfectly designed or heavily fortified, can withstand soldiers who are willing to pay any price for victory. Their story reminds us that behind every turning point in history, there are individuals who chose to step forward when others could not.